The night it happened, nobody in that hotel bar was paying attention to the woman in the corner. That was the point. That had always been the point. She was sitting alone at the far end of the bar, back to the wall, nursing something amber over ice. No uniform, no insignia. Just a woman who looked like she might be a contractor, maybe a consultant. Someone passing through Fort Bragg the way a lot of people pass through. Quietly, without expectation, without announcement. Her hair was pulled back. Her jacket was unremarkable. The only thing that might have caught your eye, if you were the kind of person who knew what to look for, was the way she sat. Not tense, not relaxed. Something in between that had a name, but most people never learned it. The group came in around 2100. There were 6 of them, junior officers, mostly. 1 captain, the rest lieutenants. They were loud in the way that men are loud when they've been drinking elsewhere first, and have decided that this room now belongs to them. The bar wasn't crowded. A few civilians. A couple of NCOs nursing beers at a table near the window. The bartender, a retired sergeant named Goss, who had seen this particular configuration of confidence and rank more times than he could count. The captain's name was Whitfield. He was 29 years old, which was not young for a captain, but was young for the way he carried himself. Like he had already been awarded something the paperwork hadn't caught up to yet. He had the build of someone who had once been an athlete and had since made peace with the fact that command presence could substitute for the rest. His name tape was sharp. His boots were immaculate. He scanned the room the way men like him always did, quickly, categorically, assigning everyone a value before they'd said a word. His eyes moved over the woman in the corner and moved on. She noticed. She always noticed. But she didn't adjust her posture, didn't look up, didn't do any of the small things people do when they've been seen and want to signal that they know it. She took a slow sip of her drink and kept her eyes on the middle distance, which was a wall, which was fine. Goss sat around in front of the group without being asked. He had a system. Give them what they want early, keep the pace controlled, and most nights resolve themselves without incident. He'd been doing it for 11 years. He was good at it. The group settled into the cluster of high tops near the center of the room. Whitfield's voice was the loudest, which seemed to be a condition of his existence rather than a choice. He was telling a story about a training rotation, something about a unit that had failed a land navigation course, in a way he found structurally hilarious. His lieutenants laughed at the right moments. One of them, a younger man named Cassidy, had the particular laugh of someone who has learned that laughing at the right moments is its own kind of skill. 20 minutes passed. The woman in the corner ordered a second drink. She said 2 words to Goss, who nodded and turned away without comment. She had the kind of presence that made service feel like a transaction rather than a social event. And Goss, who had developed a precise instinct for guests who wanted to be left alone, left her alone. The problem started the way problems like this always start, with a small thing that revealed a larger thing. Whitfield wanted to move to the bar. The high tops were fine, but the bar was better, and the bar had a stretch of open seats that his group could occupy if they arranged themselves correctly. He moved toward it with the easy confidence of a man who had never seriously considered that space might not be available to him. The open stretch ended about 3 stools from the woman in the corner. Whitfield settled in 2 stools away. His lieutenants filed into the remaining seats. Goss reset the drinks without comment. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Then Cassidy leaned past the man between him and Whitfield, said something low, and Whitfield turned and looked at the woman for the first time with actual attention. What he saw, apparently, was a problem. "You waiting for someone?" he asked. She didn't look up immediately. When she did, her eyes moved to him with the unhurried quality of someone who has plenty of time and no particular use for urgency. "No," she said. "This is a lot of bar to take up on your own." She looked at the stools around her. There were 2 empty ones between her and the nearest member of his group. She looked back at him. "I'll manage," she said. Something shifted in Whitfield's expression. It wasn't anger yet. It was the precursor to anger. The moment when a man who is accustomed to a certain quality of response receives something different and has to decide what that means about the situation. He had at this point several options available to him. He chose the worst one. "I'm Captain Whitfield," he said, like the rank was an explanation. "I heard you the first time." She said, "You introduced yourself when you came in." He hadn't spoken to her when he came in. He'd introduced himself to the room, which was a different thing, and which she had apparently filed away without effort. That detail seemed to land on him in an unpleasant way. And you are? She picked up her glass, enjoying a quiet drink. The lieutenant to Whitfield's left, a man named Pruitt, broad-shouldered, with the slightly too eager quality of someone trying to be useful, laughed at this in a way that was clearly not an endorsement of the woman's position. It was the kind of laugh designed to communicate solidarity with rank. Whitfield didn't acknowledge it. Look, he said, and the word look, the way men use it in that particular tone, has never once preceded a sentence worth hearing. I don't know who you are or what you do, but this is a military installation, and there's a certain way things work here. I'm aware, she said. Then you know that when an officer speaks to you, there's an expected response. She set her glass down. She turned to face him fully, which was the first time she had moved in a way that could be read as deliberate engagement. Her eyes were a color that the light in the bar made difficult to categorize. What was not difficult to categorize was the quality of attention in them, the particular steadiness of someone who has been in situations where attention was the difference between outcomes. I'm not active duty, she said. Whatever expectation you're operating under doesn't apply to me. You're in a military bar. I'm in a hotel bar that serves military personnel. There's a distinction. Whitfield stared at her for a moment. Then he looked at Cassidy, who offered nothing useful. Then he looked back at her. You know what your problem is? He said. She waited. You think being cold makes you interesting. The bar had gotten quieter, not silent. Goss was moving bottles. A TV above the far end was running highlights. The two NCOs by the window were still talking. But the quality of the ambient noise had changed in the way it does when people within earshot have decided to listen without appearing to listen. She didn't answer the question. She picked up her drink, finished what was in it, and set the glass down with a careful final sound. That was when Whitfield reached out and put his hand on her arm. It wasn't a grab. It was the kind of contact men like him deploy when they want to make a point about access, the suggestion that they can touch you, which is its own kind of statement. She looked down at his hand. Then she looked up at him. Don't, she said. He didn't move his hand. What happened next took approximately 4 seconds and was, by any technical measure, restrained. She removed his hand from her arm, using a motion that looked almost gentle from a distance and was not gentle at all in its mechanics. His wrist bent at an angle that produced an immediate and involuntary response in his whole upper body. A sharp, downward pitch forward, a sound that was not quite a word. By the time he straightened, she had already returned her hand to the bar and was looking at Goss, who was standing very still at the far end. Check, please, she said. The table by the window had gone completely silent. Whitfield's face had passed through several colors in rapid succession and had settled on something that was making decisions it was going to regret. He straightened fully, rotated his wrist once, and said in a voice that had lost most of its social calibration, "Do you have any idea who I am?" She looked at him. Captain Whitfield, she said, 29th Infantry, 2 rotations, no combat deployments, graduated Ranger School in the bottom third of your class, which your file notes as a scheduling conflict. The silence in the bar had become absolute. She knew his file. Whitfield opened his mouth. Nothing organized came out. Cassidy had leaned back from the bar by several inches. Pruitt was looking at the bottles behind Goss, with the intense focus of a man trying to be somewhere else using only his eyes. Goss set a folded receipt on the bar in front of her. She laid cash on it without looking, slid off the stool, and picked up her jacket from the hook beneath the bar. She moved toward the door at a pace that was neither hurried nor slow. At the threshold, she stopped. She didn't turn around. She spoke to the room, or to no one in particular, or perhaps to the wall in front of her, in the same unhurried voice she'd used for everything else. When you graduate Ranger School in the top 2%, she said, you stop needing people to know who you are. Then she was gone. Nobody at the bar spoke for a moment. Then Goss picked up her glass, rinsed it, set it on the drying rack, and said, without looking at anyone, "That'll be $42.50, Captain." It was Cassidy later that night who started asking questions. He wasn't the type who let things go, which was either his best quality or his worst one, depending on the situation. He went to Pruitt first, then to the NCOs who had been at the window table, neither of whom would tell him anything, except that he should probably leave it alone. He didn't leave it alone. He found Goss at the end of the night, after the group had settled their tab and gone mostly quiet, and Whitfield had disappeared upstairs in the manner of a man managing a very particular kind of headache. Who was she? Cassidy asked. Goss looked at him for a long time. Goss had the face of a man who had been asked a lot of questions he didn't answer, and had developed, Over time, a very specific expression for the moment before he declined. She comes through twice a year, he said finally. Never causes trouble. Never asks for anything. Tips well. That's not what I asked. Goss set down the glass he was drying. Her name is Shen, he said. That's all I've got. And that's more than I should have told you. The name was enough for Cassidy to start, which meant it was enough for things to start moving in a direction Whitfield did not know about yet. It took 48 hours. The answer came not from any database Cassidy had access to, but from a master sergeant named Tolliver who worked in the S2 shop and who, when Cassidy described the incident in enough detail, went very still in the way that people go still when they recognize something they weren't expecting to encounter. Say that again, Tolliver said. The wrist thing. Cassidy said it again. Tolliver was quiet for a moment. Then he said, and she knew his file, word for word. Tolliver leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment, and then at Cassidy with an expression that was not quite pity and not quite amusement, and was, in some way, both. You said her name is Shen. That's what Goss said. First name or last? He didn't say. Tolliver was quiet again. Then he said, I need you to understand something before I tell you what I think I know. What I'm about to say is based on something I heard during a joint training briefing 3 years ago, and I am not confirming anything. And you didn't hear it from me. Cassidy said he understood. There was a woman, Tolliver said slowly, who went through SEAL qualification training as part of an evaluation program that never officially existed. The program was designed to assess whether gender-integrated special operations selection was viable at the Tier 1 level. It ran for 2 years. One candidate completed it. He paused. Her name in the documentation I saw was listed as a code designation. But the officer who briefed us mentioned a surname, offhand, like he hadn't meant to. Cassidy waited. Shen, Tolliver said. The room was quiet. She didn't just complete the program, Tolliver said. She set 3 qualification records. 2 of them still stand. The third was reclassified because they decided the metric needed to be reconsidered. Cassidy thought about the bar, about the 4 seconds, about the way she had moved, not fast, not aggressive, but with the total absence of hesitation that is its own kind of language. And Whitfield, he said. She knew his file. If what I'm telling you is accurate, Tolliver said, then knowing files is part of what she does, has been for a long time. Understanding the personnel you're likely to encounter is foundational to certain kinds of work. What kind of work? Tolliver looked at him. The kind, he said, where the people doing it don't introduce themselves. Whitfield found out on the 3rd day. It didn't come from Cassidy. It came from his battalion commander, Colonel Reyes, who called him into the office at 0730 and closed the door, which was never a good sign, and set a single sheet of paper on the desk between them, which was worse. The paper didn't have a lot of words on it. The words it had were precise and in their precision total. Whitfield read it twice. Sir, he said. Don't, Reyes said. He didn't. The paper documented in the dry language of official record the following: that the woman in the hotel bar was a retired chief petty officer operating under a consultant designation attached to a joint task force that Whitfield's unit was, in a peripheral and administrative sense, connected to. That her clearance level exceeded his by several classifications that were not listed on the paper because they could not be listed on the paper. That she had, upon returning to wherever she had gone after leaving the bar, filed no complaint and made no report. That the information Whitfield was now reading existed not as a punitive measure but as what the paper called, in a phrase that Reyes clearly found appropriate, a corrective orientation. At the bottom of the page, in a section that was not standard to any form Whitfield had seen before, there was a single line that appeared to have been added by someone with access to the kind of systems that added things to forms other people couldn't reach. It read, She asked us not to pursue formal action. We are honoring that request. We are also honoring her assessment of the situation, which she summarized as follows. He'll figure it out. Whitfield sat with that for a long time. He'll figure it out. Not a condemnation, not a dismissal. Something that was in its own way harder than either. The extension of patience to someone who had not yet earned it, from someone who had no obligation to extend it. He thought about the bar, about the way she had looked at him, not with contempt, not with anger, but with the particular steadiness of someone who had already processed the situation and found it unremarkable. He had been, in her estimation, a known quantity, a type, a captain with a certain kind of history and a certain kind of confidence and a certain kind of blindness that she had encountered before and would encounter again, and had apparently decided at some point was not worth the energy of a formal response. She had been right, which was the part that was most difficult to sit with. Dismissed, Reyes said. Whitfield stood. He picked up his cover. At the door he stopped. Sir, he said, do you know what she's doing now? Her current assignment? Reyes looked at him for a moment. No, he said, and neither do you. And that's the point. 3 weeks later, Cassidy ran into Goss at the PX. They stood in the cereal aisle, which was not where either of them had expected this conversation to happen, but the cereal aisle was where it happened. Did Whitfield ever say anything? Goss asked. Not a word, Cassidy said. But he's different. Goss considered this. Different how? Cassidy thought about it. Quieter, like he's listening. More. Goss nodded slowly, the way a man nods when something has confirmed a thing he already believed. She has that effect, he said. Cassidy almost asked another question. Then he thought about Tolliver, and the word foundational, and the 3 qualification records, 2 of which still stood. He thought about 4 seconds, and a wrist and a voice that had said don't with the calm certainty of someone who had never needed to say it twice in her life. He thought about the last thing she had said in the doorway to no one in particular before she disappeared. When you graduate Ranger School in the top 2%, you stop needing people to know who you are. He hadn't understood it fully that night. He thought he understood it better now. It wasn't a boast. It wasn't a threat. It was something closer to a description of a place she had reached. A particular kind of stillness that exists on the other side of having proven, repeatedly and without audience, exactly what you are capable of. The kind of stillness that doesn't require a room's attention because it has never needed a room. There are 2 things a person can feed across a lifetime: the need to be seen or the discipline to keep going whether or not anyone is watching. Shen had made her choice a long time ago. The rest of them were still working on it.